She raised him like her own, gave him everything, and in return he threw her out. It was a Thursday afternoon in late March, the kind of day when Mississippi weather couldn't decide whether it was spring or winter. The sun hung behind gray clouds, light drifting like it hadn't yet chosen whether to blaze or dim. Kayla stood in front of the house she had lived in for 22 years, holding a canvas bag with a crusty loaf of bread, a few cans of baked beans, and a hot rotisserie chicken from her favorite shop near her old job. She wore indoor slippers, the soft kind with fleece lining. The heels had worn thin from years of familiar steps. A breeze swept across the porch, carrying the scent of jasmine from the hedges along the iron fence. Kayla leaned forward, resting against the white-painted door, and pulled her familiar keyring from her handbag. But the lock wouldn't turn. She tried again, slowly, then fast, flipped it, pulled it out, as if the problem was in her hand, but it wasn't. The lock had been changed. Her heart skipped. Her mind tried to reason maybe it was repairs or a new security system Lucas hadn't mentioned, but whatever it was, someone had to be inside. She knocked, first soft, then harder. The sound echoed off the wood, spilling into the quiet street where a few kids kicked an old soda can. Kayla wore a pale blue sweater that carried the scent of lavender homemade room spray, a recipe from an old magazine. There were sounds behind the door. Then a click. A narrow crack opened. Emanuela, Lucas's girlfriend, peeked out wearing an oversized hoodie and leggings, makeup light but tired, like she'd just woken from a half-slept nap. She raised her eyebrows like she hadn't expected Kayla to show up. "Oh, you weren't supposed to be back this soon." Kayla frowned. A vague dread clenched her chest. "Why can't I get in?" Emanuela glanced back inside, as if waiting for someone else to handle it, then reluctantly stepped onto the porch, shutting the door behind her. Her voice lowered, "I think. Lucas meant to tell you. Tell me what you don't live here anymore." The air froze. 1 second, 2. Everything felt suffocating. "What did you just say?" Emanuela gave a tight smile, the kind a bank clerk gives when denying a loan. "It's just paperwork," Lucas said. "You signed over the house. A while back, those papers on the kitchen counter. I did what he said you already signed, a few weeks ago, that day he brought them back. You signed them at the kitchen table." Kayla was yanked back to that day, sunlight slanting through the kitchen window, the smell of sweet potato pie. Lucas holding a stack of papers saying something about taxes, a temporary transfer just in case. Her glasses scratched her eyes, tired. She didn't read closely. She trusted her son, the boy she carried home from the hospital, still wrapped in newborn cloth. Her heartbeat slowed, cold, rigid, as if every nerve had been cut loose. Emanuela turned back inside, mumbling she'd call Lucas, then shut the door, locked again. One more time. Kayla stood there, a minute, then 5, then 10, still holding the weighty canvas bag. Wind swept by, pressing her sweater tight against her body. She didn't knock again, just stepped down the flaking cement steps, her worn-out slippers brushing against each stair, and walked away. No questions, no tears, no begging. The rotisserie chicken still nestled in the bag, tucked under her elbow like holding a child. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't coming back. Lucas hadn't just taken her house. He had taken her trust deeper than any foundation. Kayla hadn't just lost a home. She had lost the child she believed was hers in every way that mattered, even if there was no blood between them. Sitting at the bus stop near the Baptist church, Kayla opened her wallet, an old bus pass, her cousin Doris's number, and a photo of Lucas at 7, grinning in front of a Christmas tree wearing superhero pajamas. In 1996, Kayla was a night shift nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. A black woman in her 30s, single, childless after 2 miscarriages and 1 failed IVF round. She lived quietly, worked hard, went to church on weekends, and wrote handwritten letters to her mother in Georgia. One night, Kayla met Lucas, a boy not yet 3 years old, with a fractured left wrist from a fall down the stairs. His skin was pale, his hair matted with dust, and he wore a t-shirt 3 sizes too big, the collar stained with mustard. He was silent. He didn't cry. No one followed him. His foster mother signed the release form and left. Kayla had never planned to adopt anyone, but sometimes God doesn't knock. He places a child in your hands and watches what you'll do next. Lucas didn't eat for the first 2 days. Not until Kayla fed him the third spoonful of chicken soup did a spark appear in his eyes. That night, Kayla couldn't stop thinking about that look. 2 months later, she filed the adoption paperwork. 6 months after that, Lucas took her last name. Friends thought she was insane. A single black woman adopting a white boy with a troubled history. Are you trying to save the whole system? No. I'm just trying to save one. Unconditional love, but not blind love. Kayla gave Lucas everything, taught him to swim, play piano, tie a tie, stand up to bullies. Every birthday, she baked a cake from scratch. Every holiday, even without money for fancy wrapping paper, she still wrapped gifts in newspaper and added stickers. She loved him like her own without needing a title. But Lucas never truly accepted the difference. At school, he'd get asked, "Where's your mom? Why doesn't she match your color?" At the supermarket, people stared with judgment in their eyes. In high school, Lucas asked, "Am I adopted?" "Yes. But that doesn't mean you're not mine." He nodded. But from then on, he never called her mom, at least not when friends were around. In college, Lucas almost never came home, and when he did, it was only to grab things or ask for tuition money. Kayla still left the porch light on every night, still kept his room spotless. She believed love, even silent, had its own voice. When her husband Arthur died from a misdiagnosed blood clot, Kayla thought that was the deepest pain she'd ever feel. But Lucas's cold, deliberate distance was another knife. Not death, but a choice. That day, she didn't go back home. Not out of pride or anger, but because as she stood on the porch, Kayla realized that house was no longer her home. The light, the air, even the sound of wind through the eaves had changed. She drove around Jackson aimlessly, one hand holding a grocery bag, the other loosely on the steering wheel as if guiding a child on a walk. Every time she turned onto a familiar street, she paused. Red brick houses, jasmine trellises, pickup trucks and driveways, everything seemed alive except her. That night she slept in her old beige Chevy, the car Arthur once called the weekend friend. She parked near a gas station next to a 24-hour diner. Didn't go in, just sat there, neon lights casting shadows on her weathered face. The rotisserie chicken went cold. She didn't eat. Just stared out the window, watching strangers pass by, a middle-aged man arguing with his wife on the phone, a girl with dyed green hair, an old man pushing a wheelchair slowly. Each had their own life. No one saw her. Kayla didn't cry, not a tear, because emptiness hurts more than tears. The next morning she stopped by the bank, not for money but to feel anchored. A small branch on 42nd Street. The tellers had known her for years. When one asked, "Everything okay, Mrs. Kayla?" she answered softly, "I'm fine, just checking my account." When the screen showed a balance of $9,547 and $200, Kayla held her breath. The teller had no idea what that number meant. Probably thought it was some long-term investment. But for Kayla, it was everything she had left, not just money, but blood, tears, memories, effort, and the justice she'd earned after Arthur's death. She had never told Lucas, or anyone. Arthur had died because of a medical error, and Kayla, a nurse who'd worked night shifts for 2 decades, knew that couldn't be forgiven. She hadn't let it go, even though she prayed nightly to. She won. Nearly $10 million couldn't bring Arthur back, but it proved that Kayla wasn't someone to be trampled. She placed a portion into a trust under her maiden name, Kayla Mae Armstrong, divided it into several smaller accounts, not out of fear but for peace of mind. She knew money could turn people into monsters. She'd seen it in the ER families arguing over who had the right to pull the plug. Lucas had never asked if she had money, and she never told him. That fact alone gave her comfort, like holding on to a secret no one could steal. Kayla rented a room in Meridian, nearly 2 hours' drive from Jackson. She didn't choose a luxury hotel, just an old roadside motel, walls painted soft peach, the AC wheezing like an old man's breath. But she felt safe there. The landlady was a Mexican woman in her 60s named Rosa, with silver hair and eyes sharp as knives. Rosa didn't ask too many questions. She simply said, "Stay as long as you need. No one will bother you here." That was exactly what Kayla needed, a space where no one would call her a stranger in her own house. The room had a singles bed, a thick, bleach-scented blanket, and a small desk pushed against the window. Kayla opened her notebook, the one she always kept in her bag, filled with 20 years' worth of scribbled notes, prayers, phone numbers, pumpkin pie recipes, and a quote she once heard from a white preacher. "The devil doesn't need to break you. He just needs to make you tired." That was true. Kayla was tired, but she hadn't fallen. That afternoon, she called Doris. Doris was a tough woman, curly hair, thick southern accent, once a legal aid worker helping elderly women who were conned out of their assets. Kayla had met Doris years ago when she nearly got sued over a vague AC clause in her lease. Doris helped not just with paperwork, but with a bowl of chicken soup and a night on her couch. When Doris picked up and heard Kayla's voice, she didn't ask what happened. She simply said, "Go on," Kayla told her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She recited it like reading a medical report on her own life. Doris wasn't surprised. "I've heard stories like this. Just didn't think I'd hear one from you. Neither did I. He conned you, but he forgot who raised him. That was his biggest mistake." Doris recommended a lawyer, CJ. The name made Kayla laugh for the first time in days. CJ was an old friend of Arthur's, an aging lawyer with a silver beard once dismissed for being too stubborn for politics. But Kayla knew he was the only one who could gut a contract like filleting a fish. She texted CJ. The meeting was set for the next morning. CJ chose an old roadside diner off I-20, the kind only locals went to, where the wooden booths gleamed with age and waitresses called everyone honey, whether they were newly divorced or fresh out of prison. Kayla ordered black coffee. CJ got a grilled cheese. No one rushed. After hearing the full story, CJ smirked Kayla. "I could handle this case in my sleep." She gave a faint smile. "I don't want to win for revenge. I want to win to get my name back, and I'll help you do just that." He started laying out the plan. Use elder fraud protections, prove Kayla signed under misleading conditions. He said, "All we need is one Mississippi judge with a conscience." Kayla straightened in her seat, eyes fixed on CJ. In that moment, she felt like herself from 20 years ago, the woman who dared to adopt a child no one else wanted. She had once walked into that journey without insurance, and now she'd do it again, not for Lucas, but for herself. But before stepping into a legal war, Kayla knew there was one thing she had to close: talk to Lucas. Not to beg, not to threaten, just to close the book, so she could move forward without dragging more anger along. She didn't call ahead. She knew Emanuela would block her if given the chance. She just showed up. Late afternoon, sunlight filtered through the oak trees. The wind smelled of early autumn smoke. She was ready. She had nothing left to lose, but so much to reclaim. When Lucas opened the door, his eyes were confused. "Mom!" She raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just want to speak." Lucas stood still. "I raised you not out of obligation. I never expected anything except for you to live well. I may not be your birth mother, but I was there for every first step you took. I never made you feel like an outsider, but you made me feel like one." Lucas said nothing. "I'll let the court decide. I'm not here to threaten you. I came to remind you no one can take away my dignity unless I let them." With that, she turned away. No reply, no looking back. And that was when Kayla truly returned. That afternoon, Kayla left the motel in her old Honda, a light coat of dust on the hood like memories that had never been cleaned away. She wasn't in a hurry, nor was she sure where she was going. But after years of working night shifts as a nurse, there was one thing she knew better than anyone else: to save others, you first have to be clear-headed. Her first stop was a diner off I-20, where truckers filled up their tanks and bellies. Kayla had been here a few times when Arthur was alive. He used to love pastrami sandwiches with a cold Dr. Pepper. Now she sat alone in the far corner by a window facing the parking lot. A young waitress named Maddie poured her a hot cup of coffee and offered a soft smile. Kayla sat for a long time. She opened her notebook. The first page was in Arthur's handwriting, an old note. "You're stronger than you think you are." His voice seemed to echo in the quiet. Kayla touched the ink gently. In that moment, she wasn't a betrayed woman or a foster mother tricked into signing over a child. She was someone who had once fought an entire system for justice for her late husband. That's when she called Doris, an old friend who had once helped her through a housing dispute. Doris was retired now, but still well connected with community legal networks. After a few minutes, Doris said, "I know someone. Elijah Marks, civil rights lawyer in Biloxi. Tough, honest, and he's got heart." Kayla wrote down the name, thanked her, and for the first time in weeks, felt something close to hope. 2 days later, Kayla drove 4 hours to Biloxi to meet Elijah. His office was in an old building near the marina. The hand-painted sign read Marks and Associates. litigation, and civil rights law. Elijah was a tall black man in his 40s, deliberate in his movements, his voice low, like a cello. As Kayla recounted everything, he didn't interrupt. He nodded, took a few notes. When she got to the part about signing over property under misleading and manipulated conditions, Elijah sat up, eyes sharp. This is a case of coercion, psychological manipulation, and contractual fraud. If you're ready, we'll file immediately. Kayla looked him straight in the eyes and nodded without hesitation. I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want my name back on that door. In the weeks that followed, Kayla became the woman Arthur had loved, meticulous, resolute, never doing anything halfway. She moved into a small apartment behind a laundromat. The landlady, an old Puerto Rican woman named Luisa, played salsa at 6 a.m. and called Kayla Reina Queen. Kayla visited the law office 3 times a week. They examined every line of the documents Lucas had her sign, every signature, every misleading clause. Elijah emphasized, the key is proving you signed under manipulation and without full knowledge. Most importantly, they exploited a family relationship for personal gain. Kayla provided messages, notes, financial transfers. There was even a voice recording of Emanuela telling a real estate agent, "She won't know. Just let us handle the paperwork." Elijah played it twice. Then he said, "This is the silver bullet." The lawsuit was filed with the Lauderdale County Civil Court on a rainy Monday morning. No reporters, no neighbors. Only Kayla knew, and that was enough. Lucas was served with the lawsuit and case file. No response. Emanuela vanished from social media. Kayla later learned they had left the state without leaving an address. She wasn't surprised. She knew they didn't have the courage to face what they'd done, but that only made her more determined. The court date was set for the following month. While waiting, Kayla spent every Sunday cooking at the motel, not for guests, but for the women living around her. Most were widows, single mothers, or women rebuilding their lives after crisis. They called her meal the Kayla dinner: golden roasted chicken, steaming red bean soup, crisp cornbread, and mint lemonade. No one asked personal questions, but everyone stayed until nightfall, as if they didn't want to leave the only warm place left in a cold, indifferent world. As the trial date approached, Elijah told Kayla that Lucas might not show up. People like him usually run from responsibility. But don't worry, ma'am. You've already got enough evidence. Kayla nodded. She didn't need his presence to feel justified. She only wanted the law to acknowledge it. The hearing took place in a small courtroom, but the atmosphere was tense as a drawn bowstring. The judge was Sylvia Green, a white woman in her 60s known for her fairness and strict demeanor. After reviewing the files, hearing Elijah's arguments, and listening to Emanuela's recording, Judge Green nodded, her voice sharp. The court finds that the defendant used deceitful tactics to trick the plaintiff into signing over property rights. The court hereby nullifies the documents and restores Mrs. Kayla Williams's ownership of the wrongfully transferred property. There was no applause, no tears. Kayla simply let out a long breath, light as the wind sweeping over a field after a storm. But she didn't move back into the old house. A week after the hearing, Kayla went to visit the place. The grass had grown tall, the mailbox overflowed with flyers, the windows were so dusty you could no longer see inside, but what clenched her heart was the smell. Not of cornbread or roasted chicken like before, but the cold scent of a house that no longer held love. She walked through it, touching each wall, each window frame before pulling out a sheet of paper, a deed transferring ownership of the house to a nonprofit supporting elderly women who had experienced domestic abuse. Kayla signed it. She didn't need that house anymore, because it wasn't home. What she wanted to preserve was the part of herself that had fought, had loved, and had forgiven. That evening, Kayla sat alone in the backyard of her apartment, a light blanket over her lap, sipping mint tea. October's chill was setting in, but something inside her glowed warm like a candle in the dark. She didn't think about Lucas anymore, or Emanuela, or the house, or the court. She thought about Arthur, about CJ, about Doris, about Elijah, and about herself, the woman who had once been thrown out of her home clutching a roasted chicken and now had reclaimed something far more precious than a house, her dignity. Above, the stars began to appear one by one. Kayla smiled, because she knew at last she had returned to herself. Christmas came. Kayla invited her to church, but Kayla didn't go, not because she'd lost faith, but because that year she needed to stay with herself. Instead, she hosted a small dinner in her apartment. A few women from the neighborhood came: Alma, Darlene, and even Maddie, the young waitress from the nearby diner. Everyone brought a dish cinnamon toast green beans with bacon Southern-style potato salad. No one spoke of husbands, children, or what had been lost. They simply ate, laughed, swapped recipes, and shared stories. A small moment, but Kayla realized she was no longer alone. At the start of the new year, she decided to open a shelter for women betrayed by their own families, an idea that had burned quietly in her heart ever since that night she'd slept in her car 2 blocks from her old house. She used the compensation from the hospital lawsuit, nearly $9.5 million. No one knew, and no one needed to. She named it The Haven, a place of peace. But for Kayla, it was also something she'd never had during all those years raising Lucas space to breathe. The Haven wasn't like any other shelter. No iron gates, no signs saying do not enter. Just an old wooden house painted dusky blue with a wide porch, a few rocking chairs, and bright portulaca flowers blooming in pots. The living room had a fireplace. The walls held hand-embroidered art. On the wooden table sat a small sign, "You don't need to tell your story if you're not ready. Here, silence is also a form of healing." The first to arrive was Alma, a 74-year-old woman kicked out by her son for refusing to babysit. Kayla welcomed her with chicken soup and a warm hug. The second was Darlene, whose own daughter sold her house while she was in surgery. Then came Tony, who lost everything when her brother stole their inheritance to invest in crypto. And next was Vanessa, the ex-wife of a church pastor forced out of the congregation after her husband's affair while he kept his position. Each woman stepped into the Haven carrying a wound, a part of their life no one else had believed. And each time, Kayla simply smiled and led them into the kitchen. "Would you like ginger tea or mint?" A February evening. Kayla sat on the porch. Light rain fell. Alma was knitting a sweater inside. Darlene was picking vegetables in the kitchen. The doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, but still stood up and grabbed an umbrella. Lucas stood there. Thinner, dark circles under his eyes, the arrogance he once wore had long vanished. Kayla looked at her son for a long time. No anger, no hope. Just two people who once loved in their own way but could no longer walk the same path. Lucas said softly, "I'm not here to ask for anything back." "Good, I just needed to know you're okay." Kayla was silent for a while, then nodded, "I'm okay. But not because of you." Lucas lowered his head. "Muddy shoes, empty hands. I was wrong. So wrong. But I don't know what else to do except say I'm sorry." Kayla didn't answer. She looked out at the rainy yard. Forgiveness isn't to ease someone else's guilt. It's to free yourself. Lucas looked up. Kayla met her son's gaze, not as a mother, but as a survivor of a brutal storm. "I forgive you, but I don't forget, and I don't accept you coming back as if nothing ever happened." Lucas nodded. "I understand." Kayla turned and walked into the house. "Go now, the rain's about to get heavier." Lucas stood silently, then turned and disappeared into the fog. Kayla didn't look back. She didn't need to. A year later, The Haven was featured in an article by The Atlantic, where women reclaim their lives, no media, no noise, just love and quiet. Kayla never read the article. She was too busy. Busy picking fabric to embroider pillows, busy watering her flowers, busy writing in her notebook. What we give is never lost. It just returns in another form. One Sunday morning, Alma asked Kayla, "Do you still think about the boy?" Kayla smiled light as the breeze. "I don't think about him anymore." But there's no need to forget. What mother forgets her child no matter what they become? Doesn't it make you sad? No. Sadness only comes when there's hope. And now I only hope for others. That night, Kayla sat out on the porch. A cup of hot tea in hand, a thin blanket over her knees. The moon was bright, crickets sang. Inside, the women were laughing, cooking, crocheting, building a home out of pieces of pain and recovery. Kayla closed her eyes, one deep breath, one soft laugh. No anger, no regret, no need for explanations, only peace, and for Kayla that was enough. 3 years after the trial, on a chilly October morning, Kayla sat on the porch of the white wooden house she named Miriam's Porch, an unofficial shelter for older women betrayed by their own families. The wind carried the scent of dry leaves and faint hints of pumpkin bread. On the small table beside her, a mug of steaming peppermint tea. On the floor, a fat cat named Peanut, curled up fast asleep. She wore her old plum cardigan, knitting in hand, but her eyes drifted far past the fall grass, past the white fence beyond the quiet houses lining Jackson Street. She was thinking of what she had lost, and what in the end she had found again. After the court ruled Kayla had been deceived into signing over her property, she never returned to the old house. Not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed to. A house is no longer a home, she told CJ one February afternoon as they unpacked at their new place in Meridian. It's just a shell that remembers pain. Lucas didn't show up at the trial, nor did he contact her afterward. Emanuela returned to Dallas, leaving no message. An old neighbor called to say Lucas had sold off everything, even the painting Kayla had hung on the porch, the one she'd painted by hand back in 2007. Kayla didn't react. No anger, no more pain. Just a pause in a song that had reached its final note. Kayla didn't choose to live in seclusion with her settlement money. She invested part of it to buy a house that used to belong to an old priest, nestled in the outskirts of Meridian. Not big, but it had a wide wooden porch, sliding glass doors, and a kitchen big enough to cook dinner for 6. She named the place Miriam's Porch, after her birth mother, a black woman who worked as a laundress her whole life, never had a chance at education, but never once let her child go to bed hungry. It gradually became a safe haven for elderly women betrayed by their own families, a reality far too common in America. There was Alma, 74, kicked out by her grandkids for refusing to babysit while they went to Cancun. Darlene, whose daughter sold the house she lived in while she was in the hospital. And Josie, ex-wife of a pastor, abandoned by the church after she exposed his abuse. Kayla didn't manage them. She just listened. Cooked brewed tea and always kept a chair open on the porch so they had a place to tell their stories. On the second summer, while Kayla was buying brown rice at the local grocery store, she unexpectedly ran into Lucas. He stood frozen in front of the freezer aisle, worn down, clothes, wrinkled hair, long and graying. No Emanuela, no wedding ring. Kayla gripped the cereal box behind her cart. Lucas looked up, their eyes met. They said nothing for the first 10 seconds. Then he muttered hoarse, "Mom." Kayla nodded calmly. Lucas. He lowered his head, weighed down by the sound of his own name. How are you? I'm well. Silence stretched between the squeaking carts and the intercom aisle 4, cleanup needed. Lucas swallowed hard. I've got nothing left. Kayla didn't pity him. She didn't ask why. She simply said, "You still have yourself, Lucas, and you still get to choose, become the man you were raised to be or stay the man who betrayed his mother." Lucas broke down in tears. But Kayla didn't embrace him, didn't console him. She just placed the cereal box gently in her cart and walked away. Kayla kept her tradition Sunday dinners. Every week at 6 p.m., she cooked a Southern classic, sometimes jambalaya, sometimes meatloaf, sometimes shepherd's pie. At the table, no one used phones. No one was allowed to mention their betrayers unless they truly wanted to. Instead, they shared stories, read poetry, or played Jeopardy to see who got the most answers right. One Sunday, Alma hesitantly asked Kayla, "What if one day Lucas comes back and really apologizes?" Kayla sipped her tea slowly, her gaze fixed on the sunset bleeding through the window. "I don't need an apology to move on, but I haven't locked the door." On the third Thanksgiving, Kayla wrote a letter. She never sent it. She folded it and placed it in a drawer beneath an old handkerchief. "Lucas, you hurt me to the bone. Not because you took the house, but because you denied everything good that ever existed between us. But I don't live in anger. I keep going not because I'm strong, but because each day I choose not to let your darkness dim the light in me. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I don't expect you to understand this today. But one day, if your heart becomes still enough, you will. I still keep the shirt you wore when you were 3, the one with the mustard stain. Not for the memory, but to remind myself, real love never disappears. It only gets covered up for a while. When you're ready to be a good man again, I'll be here. Mom." 5 years later, Kayla held the launch event for Miriam's Porch, an open home for elderly women in the community. People from churches, hospitals, and local government came to attend. A young female mayor gave a speech. "There are so many places for young people to reintegrate into society, but there are so few for older women to rediscover their own worth. Miriam's Porch is a guiding light." That evening, Kayla sat on the back porch. A light rain was falling. She wrapped herself in a blanket, holding a glass of red wine, watching the warm glow through the window where Alma was laughing with Josie about something small, perhaps the new doormat they'd just bought. Kayla closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to allow herself a moment of peace. And somewhere deep inside, Lucas was still a skinny boy in a mustard-stained shirt, terrified of being left behind. But Kayla no longer tried to save him, because she knew a great mother isn't the one who holds on to her child forever, but the one strong enough to let go when love has been betrayed. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed a relaxing and captivating storytelling experience. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support gives me the motivation to create more amazing content.